Hello and welcome back to the MLB Rundown. We're about a quarter of the way through the Major League Baseball season, and the beauty of that is it means we've still got 3/4 of a season of fun left ahead of us. I'm your host, Josh Shepardson, and you can follow me on Twitter at BChat50. I'm joined by CBSSports.com's RJ White, who you can follow on Twitter, where he posts as at RJWhite1. How's it going, RJ?
It's going pretty good. I've actually this week started my Dynasty rookie draft in two fantasy football leagues. So it's been a week for me full of moving my board around and swinging trades and landing some players. So it's been pretty fun.
That's always fun, and it's nice to hear some football talk as well. I see we have something up on Daily Fantasy Cafe looking at correlation between running back carries and fantasy value in daily fantasy. So it's got my mind thinking a little bit of football as well. But being that it's a baseball podcast, I want to start by saying kudos on a very funny title for your Riding the Wave piece. For those with short memories, it wasn't that long ago that we were referring to the Astros as the Lastros, and you put a spin on it referring to them as the Firstros, and that was the first that I saw that, and it did definitely elicit a chuckle from me when I read it. I had to pause and think about what I was reading for a second, which is always good too. But speaking of the Astros, the first player I'd really like to talk about from that article is a former Astro. Never made it to the big league squad, but was a Rule 5 selection of the Texas Rangers this offseason, and that's DeShields Jr. Why don't you tell me a little bit about the speedster?
Well, DeShields has been what fantasy owners who draft Billy Hamilton about 5 rounds too early every year have wanted Billy Hamilton to be. He has something like a .466 on base percentage in his last 16 games, I believe. And when he gets on base, he's using his speed to steal bases and score runs. On Thursday, he went 1 for 2 with a pair of walks, and he didn't swipe a base, but he has 11 steals in 61 at-bats at this point. He stole more than 50 bases in both 2013 and 2014 down on the farm, and in 2012, he did even better. He stole 101 bases in 135 games, which is Billy Hamilton-esque type speed. The problem comes down to where is he going to play once Josh Hamilton returns, something that's expected to happen as early as Monday. The Rangers have Leonys Martin in center field, and though he hasn't necessarily been great, that doesn't mean the Rangers are ready to give up on him in favor of DeShields. It's possible the two outfielders could form a platoon in center, with DeShields seeing most of his work against lefties and then seeing work, obviously, in pinch hit or pinch run situations. It's also possible the Rangers do bench Martin and roll with DeShields near the top of the lineup on a daily basis, considering how hot he's been. Until we know their plans, I can't jump completely aboard the DeShields train, but if he does see regular time next week, the people who've been picking him up are going to look very smart, and if he's available in any leagues at that point, I'm certainly going to grab him.
Yeah, definitely, and it's rare that you see a player, Rule 5 pick especially, make waves in fantasy leagues of all sizes. I mean, if DeShields is getting regular playing time, he's on the map in standard mixed leagues as well. And in addition to pointing out that he stole 11 bases, as you did, I'd like to point out that he's only been caught once. He's been really efficient, and I love the walk rate. He's walking in 17.6% of his plate appearances this year, and he's not chasing. He's swinging at pitches outside the strike zone, almost 10% less than the league average according to the data at Fangraphs. So really like what he's doing. I mean, if he can get on first base, whether it's slapping singles or working walks, he could really put his top shelf speed to use, and he has already with 11 steals and 12 chances. But moving on, I'd like to discuss another player that was in your article that I have to admit I wasn't all that familiar with Mike Wright before his spot start for the Orioles. He wasn't a highly touted prospect, and really he hadn't put up eye-popping minor league numbers, but he was a guy who fared much better in his second turn at each stop in the upper minors. Struggled in 2012 at the AA level, but thrived in 2013, posting a .327 FIP and 21.8% strikeout rate with a 6.2% walk rate in his repeat trip to the Eastern League in 2013. Stumbled in Take 1 at the AAA level last year, but was strong in 6 starts earlier this season. The other thing that I really love about his lone start in the big leagues is it gives us some pitch FX data to look at. And I've admitted my velocity bias on the podcast before, and I'm a sucker for pitchers who throw very hard. It gives you a little bit more room for error. Tends to show up well in strikeout rate. Not always. I mean, you do have some exceptions where you've got the hard-throwing sinker ballers that are just pounding the bottom of the zone, but he leaned on his four-seam fastball quite often in his first start, throwing at 55.4 5-6% of the time, according to Brooks Baseball Data, and it was a gem, real blazing heater, averaging 96.15 miles per hour. He backed it by throwing a sinker 16.67% of the time. Comes in a little bit softer, a couple ticks below that four-seam fastball, but really throws hard. Also threw his changeup and slider. Changeup and slider weren't thrown a lot. Both were only thrown 11 times apiece. But he did generate an empty swing on each of those. And he tallied 8 swinging strikes on his four-seam fastball. In all, it was 10 swinging strikes on 90 pitches thrown, which is a really nice rate. If you continue to blow that heater by people, going to give him some wiggle room with the secondaries. And if either of those secondaries steps up, he's got some strikeout potential. But basically, this is a long-winded way of me saying that I agree with your assessment that he's a good ad for a spot start on Saturday. And if he pitches well, I mean, maybe he sticks in the rotation. Bud Norris certainly isn't a world beater. He's good when he's going right. I do think that there is some wiggle room for him to maybe emerge. At worst, I think you're looking at a decent spot start, and I don't think he's going to do too much damage against a Marlins squad that just isn't particularly good against right-handed pitching. Anything you'd like to add with him, RJ?
Honestly, not really. I knew nothing about him and figured it was just a situation where he'd make a spot start and we wouldn't hear from him again when he came up on Sunday. But as you said, he was so good against the Angels, and fantasy owners have been scooping him up just in case he's the next out-of-nowhere star. His fastball was great in the season debut, as you said. We'll see if he can keep it up against the Marlins this weekend. It is a great matchup, and it's definitely one to use. To look at him in at least daily fantasy leagues, if nothing else, he could be a nice option there. I'd add him in deeper leagues over roster fodder types at the position, but I wouldn't go crazy for him. You mentioned Bud Norris. He could stick over Bud Norris, but the Orioles also have Kevin Gausman could be picking up a rotation spot eventually. So that's another thing you have to look toward in the future. Wright would probably have to continue to be excellent, over his next few starts to stick in the rotation, because if there's any drop off at all, you figure that they'd probably give that spot to Gausman in the long run.
Yeah, that's certainly a very good point. Who else would you like to talk about, RJ?
Another deep ad recommendation I had was Jose Ramirez, the shortstop of the Indians. He got some run in the number 2 spot with Carlos Santana missing a few games this week. He fared well in that role. He went 5 for 10 with 3 walks and 3 stolen bases in 3 games. Santana returned Thursday, and Ramirez dropped back down to 7th, where he went 1 for 4 with a walk. He's obviously less appealing in the bottom third of the lineup, but if this step forward in his production is real, and he had a pretty bad, first 4 or 5 weeks of the season, so it might not be real. But if it is real, the Indians may want to consider moving him up to the leadoff spot and pushing Jason Kipnis down to a run-producing role, considering how well the second baseman is playing. If you have, say, Ramirez 1, Santana 2, then Brantley and Kipnis, that could be a pretty strong lineup. Ramirez has yet to figure things out at the major league level consistently, but he has a nice track record in the minors, so it's not like this short-term excellence has come out of nowhere. He's just 22 years old now, but he hit 306, 355, 411 across 4 seasons in the minors at that young age of 18 to 21. He stole about 36 bases per 500 at bat, so he could provide fantasy owners with some steals as well. He fared well in AAA last year. He posted an 801 OPS and 245 at bats. You consider his age, it's not surprising he has yet to hit his stride fully with the Indians, but his performance this week leaves at least room for optimism regarding the future. I think he's at least a decent pickup in Dynasty Leagues, even knowing that Francisco Lindor is kind of on his way up as well.
Yeah, and speaking to Lindor, it seems like the quotes that I've read recently are that they really aren't in a hurry to promote him to the big leagues. So at least it seems like Ramirez has some leash this year. And looking at those stolen base numbers, he's already got 8 steals in just 132 plate appearances this year. I had 10 and 266 last year. So all in all, that's 18 steals and 412 plate appearances from a position that really lacks offensive sizzle at all. So deep leagues, he definitely looks like a nice, cheap speed option as long as he can maintain some of those gains with the stick. He can't obviously continue to sit on the Mendoza line and be expected to help teams. But 224 BAPIP, you'd expect that to rise. He posted high BAPIPs in the minors, 297 and 266 plate appearances last year. So I do think that he's been a tad bit unlucky. All he has to hit is, if he hits around his career average of 245 through 412 plate appearances, you add that with the speed, and that's at least playable in deep leagues in the middle infield position. So I'm with you on the tout of him as a deep league ad, and if he hits, he should stick. I mean, the glove is also going to keep him in the lineup. Gets good reviews on the glove, so that certainly helps, I would say.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting to see if Lonnie Chisenhall doesn't work out at third base. Chisenhall obviously hasn't been an offensive monster. It'd be interesting to see if the Indians want to shift Ramirez over there and kind of go with a high defensive type alignment, over the long term with Lindor at short, Ramirez at third, or even swapped,
It would be. I can tell you as a fantasy owner of Carlos Carrasco, or really any fantasy owner of these pitchers for the Indians, it would be nice to see something like that if Chisenhall does continue to struggle, because they do have one of the worst defenses in baseball right now, and unfortunately the pitching staff has felt it. And take a look at their FIP and XFIP numbers compared to their ERAs, and I think that's really where it's best reflected. I mean, some of the blame certainly falls on the pitchers, but I'd say they've had some very poor luck on balls in play, and I think a lot of that has to do with the poor defense behind them.
Yeah, so ideally, maybe it'll happen, but it's just I can't say that I've seen that I've read anywhere that they're thinking about that. It's completely speculation on my part, but it would definitely help those pitchers out. Although a guy like Danny Salazar, I don't know if he needs any help at all.
Yeah, exactly. Our boy Danny Salazar has been just mowing hitters down. That blazing heater. I feel good saying that we were touting him pretty heavily headed into the season, and it's really nice seeing him deliver. But let's head to the forums to wrap this up with 3 questions, as we always do. The first is submitted by user Kid Silk. In a 10-team, 18-man roster, 8x8 head-to-head league, with 3 to 10 keepers per year, there's no keeper restrictions, would you accept an offer of D. Gordon and Steven Strasburg for Zach Greinke and Evan Longoria? And before you can answer, I'll start by chiming in and saying that I would. I looked over Kid Silk's roster, and factoring in the keeper aspect, I really would do this. Basically, he'd be flipping Marcus Semien over to third base from second base and upgrading from Longo to Gordon, which I think is a fairly substantial upgrade at this point in each player's career, while dropping down from Greinke to Strasburg, which is not a small drop, at least not currently. But I did write about Steven Strasburg's struggles with stranding base runners for Rotographs on Thursday. It's never really been a problem for him before, so I do expect him to right the ship with stranding base runners. And I don't like the current numbers. He's not missing bats with guys on base, but it sounds like it's really a mechanical issue and struggling to trust the secondaries. I think he does right the ship, and I think the gap between Greinke and Strasburg closes to being a smaller gap than the one between Longo and Gordon. And again, I think Gordon is the most interesting keeper in this bunch. What do you think, RJ?
I'd absolutely take the deal. I actually like Strasburg over Greinke in a long-term keeper, even if he struggled so far. And Gordon's shown enough at this point that I think you can lock him in as an elite option at second base over the next several years. Since I like both players, this owner's getting over both players who are being traded, the makeup of his specific roster doesn't really matter to me. I'd make it work if I'm getting a clear win in a trade like I think this is.
Yeah, and it is nice that it just so happens that the makeup of the roster is also conducive to making this deal. But I'm with you. Sometimes, even if the makeup isn't just right, if the value's there, you have to take it and then kind of figure out adjusting pieces after that. The second question is submitted by user Germani40. We've got a pair of offers involving Max Scherzer. Getting the league format out of the way, it's a 12-team head-to-head, 6x6 dynasty format, where up to 20 players can be kept. The extra categories that make it a 6x6 are OPS and losses. Germani's mulling over the idea of dealing Max Scherzer and Maikel Franco, as well as Sean Tolleson, for Todd Frazier, Jonathan Lucroy, and Fernando Rodney. First of all, would you accept that trade?
I wouldn't take that deal at all. Scherzer's clearly the best asset in this deal.
Yep.
And though Frazier's been a beast, Franco's has a decent chance to come at least close to his production over the long haul in a dynasty league. Rodney hasn't been great by any means. Lucroy's currently injured, obviously nowhere near the value of Scherzer. So this is a hard pass for me.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think we both have shared that we like Maikel Franco quite a bit, namely on last week's podcast, and I think that Scherzer's clear-cut the top player in this deal, and to give him up and a bright player like Franco, and really maybe get a modest upgrade at closer in Rodney is certainly not enough to do that deal. The other idea that they had was possibly making an offer, and I believe reading Germani's post, it wasn't clear which offer was made to them and which they were contemplating actually making themselves. The other offer that Germani's mulling over is Scherzer and Franco for Josh Donaldson. I would pass on this as well, and I love Josh Donaldson, but again, I really like Maikel Franco's upside, and I think Scherzer's a stud. I do think that, at least in this case, Donaldson is the best player to have in a long-term keeper league, but certainly not a gap between Scherzer and Donaldson that's as large as Maikel Franco. Would you agree?
Yeah, Scherzer Donaldson is close. So, I'm not really, depending on how my roster shakes out, if I have a bigger need for an ace or a third baseman, that's who it depends how it would rank. But third base has been really deep this year, and Franco is one of the reasons it has been pretty deep. So the fact that you already have Franco, I don't know that I'd add another third baseman, especially if I'm giving up an ace. One other thing on the previous deal, you said Rodney might be a little bit of an upgrade. I actually, in my Chasing Saves article, that's going up today, I wrote a little bit about the situation. He's been pretty bad for the last week or two. I think his ERA is up in the 5s somewhere, and they have a setup man named Carson Smith who's been excellent. And even though Fernando Rodney has a long-term track record, you figure he's not going to lose saves anytime soon. It really wouldn't be shocking to me to see them give him a break and try out Carson Smith in the 9th inning, considering how well he's been. Because in the long term, they're not going to have Rodney around forever. So you kind of want to get that guy a taste and see if Carson Smith could be your closer long term. So I might even like Tolleson over Rodney in the first deal. Either one, I think you just hard pass on both. Don't even worry about it and move on to trying to improve your roster another way. I don't think this team really needs a third baseman, considering how good Franco is long term.
Yeah, I'd agree. It seems interesting that they are making such an aggressive push, or at least contemplating making an aggressive push for a third baseman when Franco really is a fine play, I think, at the position right now. The final question is submitted by user CoolCat. We've got a veto question, and we're at a time of the year where I think this is an important one to address. A quarter of the way through the season, you might see some teams starting to dump in keeper leagues, but even in redraft leagues, you're going to see some moving and shaking. CoolCat mentions hating vetoes, and I'm right there with them, but explains that it's a public league, and the two owners have had some, as they describe the deals, strange deals. The deal in question is Justin Upton for Prince Fielder, Trevor Rosenthal, and Garrett Cole. We don't know exactly what the league size is, but in all honesty, to me, that's not overly important. Really what it comes down to is whether there's collusion or not. And if the deal involves collusion, it absolutely needs to be vetoed. But really, the only deals that I'm looking to veto in any league are ones that involve collusion. If it's just a deal that looks lopsided, even if it looks lopsided to everybody, if there's not collusion, I really hate to use vetoes, and I tend not to. But given the backstory, it really seems like there's some funny business going on. I tend not to like to jump to conclusions about collusion, but it is a public league, which makes it a little bit more, I guess, likely, you could say. But if you can prove it, I think that this deal needs to be vetoed. Unfortunately, I think you need to be 100% sure that there's collusion if you're going to open that can of worms. What do you think, RJ? How do you handle vetoes in your leagues?
Yeah, I think you can only veto for collusion as well. If this is a public league and none of the owners know each other, I'm assuming, then I think it's very difficult, if not impossible, to prove collusion, unless there's a way to get assigned to the same public league, if you know each other. Maybe one guy just really likes Upton, who's been outstanding so far. I don't think you can base a veto off the value of a particular trade on one side or another, and I wouldn't veto any trades if I didn't suspect collusion. That specific deal seems like an overpay for Upton, but player values are all relative in this universe. The answer might be to not play in public leagues where this is a danger of coming up. Hit the message boards and find some trustworthy people with whom you can start a league. I had one league a few years ago I had to quit because I had a deal that I thought helped my team out, and it was perceived as lopsided, and it kept on getting vetoed just because the people that were kind of leading the veto charge were the people that were ahead of me in the standings, and it was completely like a BS way to use vetoes in my opinion. So finally, after there were several people in the league that I knew I had worked with, I'd liked, but these were like the friends of those people, who kind of took things a little too far. Yeah. And so finally at one point I said, listen, if I'm not allowed to create the team I want, and you're going to keep on putting these artificial structures in front of me to prevent me from winning, then I just don't want to play in this league. So I gave up a league. I think I'd been in it 3 or 4 years. It was a keeper league, and I had a solid team, but I said, this just isn't going to fly anymore. So yeah, I agree with your take on vetoes. I've had to experience it on one end. I wasn't colluding with the other owner in any sense. This was a keeper league. We were trading a bunch of draft picks. I basically gave up like 6 keepable options to try to get Trout, and I tried to do the same thing with a pitcher because I had so many solid keepers that I wanted to condense them down. No, I think I was actually on the other end of the deal. I was probably out of it, and they were worried that I was improving a different team that could have caught them. And I'm like, well, that's the point in keeper leagues. If I'm out of it, I should be trading my one good keeper, 2 good keepers, or a lot of quality keepers to try to condense them into one. So I think you have to take into account a lot of things when you're considering vetoes. If you're one of those kind of people. But to me, it's just, if there's collusion, veto it. If there's not, don't veto it. And like you said, if you can't prove it, I think you have to err on the side of caution.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting you bring up your unfortunate circumstances. I feel like every year, being a commissioner of a certain keeper league with friends, somebody's texting me at some point about a deal that they perceive as lopsided. And it's funny how often the deal ends up being fairly close when it's said and done. And it really just comes down to perception of player value. I mean, it's usually young players involved. Somebody's dealing a hyped player. There was a deal earlier in the season, actually headed into the season in my league, where Mookie Betts was dealt with Jake Arrieta and a third player that I'm drawing a blank on for Manny Machado, Michael Pineda, and another player. And I'm getting text messages about how lopsided a deal this is. And I mean, personally, I loved Mookie Betts and Jake Arrieta coming into the league, but as far as I was concerned, I mean, it's really, what do you value? Do you think Betts is a couple years away from breaking out? Do you think the hype's out of control? And dealing with those type of complaints, it's frustrating, but it illustrates exactly why I don't do leagues where other owners can have a vote on vetoing, because the problem is they have their self-interest in mind, and they just they don't look at it as an issue of whether there's collusion or not. They look at it as, how is this going to impact me? And unfortunately, that just doesn't make for a good fantasy league layout. It doesn't make for a good atmosphere. It makes for high tension and dealing with angry owners. So I'm with you. I think the best thing to do should be to treat this as a lesson learned. Maybe get out of some of the public leagues. Hop on the Fantasy Baseball Cafe forums. We've got a classified section. Chat with some of the people and try and start up a league. I mean, start up a fun league from scratch with people that are on there, that are active. And because you can always go to the message boards and use us as a means of deciding whether maybe a deal needs to be vetoed or something of that nature in a league like that, because it's a fun community, and we really care about fantasy baseball. So I'm with you. Use this as a learning lesson. Unless you can prove collusion, then I don't think you can veto this deal. But hopefully you can have some fun moving forward and find some other leagues that are a little bit better than the public ones.
Yeah, and one other thing is, I do enjoy leagues where people have wildly different takes on values of players. If you can get into a league with 10 or 12 people that know their stuff, and you see weird trades like this happen. One guy just may be completely head over heels over Justin Upton, think there's something wrong with Trevor Rosenthal. I wasn't too high on Trevor Rosenthal coming into the year. Maybe he's found some flaw in Garrett Cole. He's willing to take on what's clearly a loss, perceived to be a loss, thinking that he's going to win it in the long term. That's fun for me. When you see lopsided trades where someone knows they're getting the bad end of the deal under public perception, but they're willing to do it because they're confident in the way they value players. I think that's good. That makes for an interesting league. So obviously you can't say that about a public league where you don't know the owners. But I do enjoy having that, and that might come down to playing in leagues that have, dynasty leagues, or playing in leagues that have different point systems, to where you all kind of have to dig in and figure out what you value as far as owning players at different positions and that kind of thing. Because then you do have people that take different strategies into the game, and you see weird trades that in standard leagues probably wouldn't fly, as far as maybe there's collusion, but in that type of league, people are willing to do it. So, if you really are kind of worried about vetoes and this kind of thing, I encourage you to explore different types of leagues as well. See if you can test your mettle and try like basically difficult type of leagues. Try to learn something new as far as fantasy goes in playing these different point systems.
Definitely. And on that note, we're going to close the show. Thank you for listening. Thank you for coming on again, RJ. It's always fun chatting on Fridays.
Thanks.
Take care.
You too.